Right, well, that's great, and I think we've all found it an inspiring and positive film. That seems to be the immediate feedback, and I think that was what Mary actually did, sort of say, can we watch 2040? Because we've been looking at these different documentaries, and you said we need something uplifting at the moment. It's quite easy to feel a little bit despairing, and I think you chose really well, Mary, especially for a nice summer August film. I think it was a great choice. Okay, I'm going to go over to Julia, because I know that you were keen to respond quite immediately because you've only watched it today. So what's your immediate response?
Yes, so I watched it today, and I thought it was brilliantly made. Obviously, lots of the ideas were not new to me, because obviously I'm in the Green Party, I'm aware of these things. I'm also doing Geography and Environmental Science degree with the Open University, just about to start my second year. I thought, like with everything, all the sort of green policies, it just all makes sense. And having seen Robert Jenrick on Channel 4 News last night talking nonsense, saying he was going to protect green belts and local democracies and things, it kind of, although it was inspiring, I just feel so frustrated, because what's happening in our government is the complete opposite of what should be happening. And I sort of feel powerless. So that was frustrating. So it's kind of inspiring and a bit frustrating at the same time. On a stylistic point of view, I would say he has the most beautiful little girl, but I think that was over-egged slightly. So yeah, I think that's my sort of immediate reaction to it all.
I'm doing that because I got interested in the film right from the beginning. I mean, not from the digging holes and daughters and things, but he went to Bangladesh to look at and to talk about the mini grids for energy, particularly in rural areas.
Connect solo home systems, and we enable energy sharing between them, which is basically trading, and the customer chooses when they want to trade and when they don't. Instead of building large grids, we're proposing a decentralized structure where we start building grids bottom up.
The setup is quite simple. Any home that has solar panels and a battery can buy this special box, which connects them to another house with the same setup. The box allows the buying or selling of energy between the homes. But it gets better.
There is still a segment of the population that still can't afford to buy a solar home system. So instead of doing that, if they can just buy a small soul box, they can just buy energy when they need it. You fill up your soul box with money. As you keep using energy, it deducts money.
What this means is that all the boxes can connect to each other to form a microgrid. It's like a water tank of community energy that people can give to or take from. The beauty is that this microgrid can then connect to the adjacent village's microgrid, and the network becomes stronger and stronger.
And that was especially interesting to me because 2 years ago, I was working in northern Uganda, where GIZ, the German development organization, are introducing mini-grids into Uganda. And one of the projects that I was to monitor was a mini-grid in northern Uganda. And I saw I talked with them about the theory behind it, the practice, the sort of social linking with the communities before the introduction and so on. And it just, I know that it works very well. But what I also observed was just officially the Uganda government is backing and supporting this kind of approach. But in fact, there's a lot of big business tied up with Uganda government in the telecoms business. And they are working very hard to downplay and to sideline this kind of work, because, of course, they're into putting up main pylons and main grids and things like that. So there's a lot of opposition to what they're doing. On the other hand, it's working. It's succeeding. So it's true. It's a perfectly feasible technology that could be rolled out very much more cheaply than the mains stuff is. Yeah, and then the rest of the film, there's all sorts of things. The food and agriculture, the use of land, and all of that. All of that is good practice, good sense. It's stuff that I've been involved in for several years now. Actually, it does work. It's a quite practical, reasonably inexpensive for local people. And technically, it functions very well. And the whole business of trading, producing surplus and trading your surplus power with your neighbor and stuff like that. These are all very practical things that already exist today, but are not mainstreamed and not promoted. I don't hear DFID supporting that kind of project when they ought to be.
Yeah,
and I think one of the other themes as well is that really to help things become greener, we need to go much more local rather than centralized. Food as well, he was talking about, converting the car parks into sort of local food growing areas. I think
food farms that spring up in empty parking lots or inside disused car parks.
The more centralized and big business there is, which is what we have at the moment, the harder it's going to be to decarbonize and protect things. Really, we've got to get much smaller, and I think the electricity was a really good example of that.
Yeah, for me that was a really powerful example. Tina, I was wondering,
it's kind of democratizing, isn't it? I mean, it's putting power into individual people's hands and giving them much more control over what they're doing.
And I think the absolute shocking statement was when he showed this example in Bangladesh working so well, and he said, and of course in some countries this is illegal.
Struck me about the microgrids is that the profits from the shared energy stay within the community and empower individuals rather than going to a big energy company elsewhere. But it turns out microgrids are currently illegal in some countries.
In that you've got the monopolies and they will not let this happen despite it being an absolutely great idea. Tina, I was just going to bring you in because you experience that on a very practical level, that you deal with a local hub. So did you watch the film and did you sort of respond to that bit about the local?
I have watched it, but it was a few weeks ago, so I was desperately trying to remember what things had particularly meant something to me.
Yeah, because I just wondered if that was something that in Oxfordshire we could really push forward, is locally owned energy, and really putting our sort of money where our mouth is, really. And saying, well, this is
do you know about Project Leo?
About Project
Leo. It's a £40 million project that's happening in Oxford, which the Low Carbon Hub has applied for the funding for, and they've got various partners. And if you Google Project Leo, you'll find it. And they've also had, I think, 4 or 5 webinars over the last 2 or 3 weeks with different people talking about it. It's quite complex. And I've sort of dipped in and out of it. It's a bit too detailed for me.
Are you saying Project Leo?
Leo, L-E-O, yes. Local Energy Oxford, it stands for.
Okay.
That's huge, £40 million.
That's the first I've heard of that. So it's Local Energy Oxford. And it certainly resonates with what Chris Goodall was saying in his book.
Yeah.
local energy and ownership of local energy grids.
There's all sorts of things already happening, like in Rosehill, where they've got, I think it's council houses that were offered solar panels and batteries. And there's a very active low carbon group in the Rosehill area. And so there's lots of energy and ideas around local energy.
That's great. I'm just thinking aloud now. I'm thinking the power of this film was really, really vital for me to kind of revitalize my ideas about things and inspire me. And I wondered if in Oxfordshire, whether we start making a little film of local energy sort of ownership ideas. And actually it's not obviously going to be as great as his, because his was very slick and there were some filmic qualities that were quite idealistic, and part of me thought, ugh, that's a little bit chunder making, but he was trying to inspire and motivate. That was his main aim. It wasn't just to be very realistic about it all. But anyway,
I think one of the things he made clear was that everything that he was visiting, talking about, and so on, is realistic, and it is happening now, and it can be done.
Yes, that's what frustrated me, because you're thinking and you watch the news and the opposite's happening. And actually, just another thing that really staggered me is what you could do with the land that is currently used for car parks and massive roads. I do love my car, I'll admit it. I use it very little, but going on holiday with the dog in the UK, once you've got used to the, but things probably will change in the future. But it was staggering to think of what the land use used for car parks.
Yeah.
We could reclaim our cities for humans instead of vehicles and generate millions of new jobs.
Vision. We just need to have that vision now. A lot of people want to be working on something that they can see as actually helping to regenerate and innovatively recreate the world.
The extra space in our cities could allow the building of more low-cost, sustainable homes. And we could see the growth of remanufacturing industries, which might convert existing vehicles to electric. But most exciting could be the urban...
Yeah, I agree. I thought that was the weakest thing for me, in that he concentrated very much on transport with the electric driverless car. And I felt he was really sort of hyping up the tech there. And I thought, well, why isn't he talking about cycling and cycle parks? And why didn't he go to Holland and do all that sort of thing? He was very into this kind of whizzy technology that in 2040, it was a little bit, futuristic. And I thought, well, actually, we don't want to emphasize electric cars. We want to emphasize active travel and public transport, for example, buses and trams.
Because as a lot
it is a science fiction film. So obviously when he picks a technology for each section, because he didn't have time to do everything, he picked something that would be really futuristic, but is actually already happening to some extent now.
True.
And it wasn't the fact they were electric, it's the fact they were shared.
Yes, that's
you didn't own a car and that you just used it for a bit of time, then dropped it off and someone got it. Just like all the people in Oxford who are in car clubs.
Now, road vehicles contribute to 20% of emissions. But our environment and sanity will be severely tested, with predictions of an extra 1 billion cars worldwide by 2040.
Here in my car, I feel safest of all. I can lock on my doors.
A possible solution could be replacing car ownership with on-demand driverless vehicles.
The same way that we went from owning DVDs or CDs or records or whatever to having all of those on demand, essentially Netflix and so on, the same thing is going to happen with transportation.
Yeah.
I am advising people, you know, in about 10 years' time, there won't be any filling stations because all the oil has to stay in the ground. You won't be able to sell your internal combustion car by then. So you'd better sell it now and join a car club.
All the cars that your mum and I ever owned were stranded assets, meaning that 96% of the time they were parked or unused. But now, in 2040, with driver costs gone and the rideshare explosion, fewer people actually own cars. They get around in luxurious pods like this for next to nothing.
Yeah, and that point, well done. Yeah, I agree. He was making that point. And as you say, he had to choose one particular one. Are there any other points that we'd like to...
I'd like to say a little bit more about the science fiction bit, and because I actually think that the bit about the daughter is essential. It is a link between now and 2040. It's a link between having the emotional need to have a planet fit for a 4-year-old daughter when she grows up, which gives her motivation, and the future bits which showed some of the ways it might be better than now, because that's why we picked it. It was a positive one. And so it's something of an artificial filmic device moving, you know, you had 2019, then 2040, then 2019, then 2040. But most of the time it worked. And particularly at the end it worked, because when I saw this futuristic party, I thought, oh God, this is a terrible ending of the film. But it wasn't the ending of the film. It actually ended with the family.
To celebrate, there are parties across the globe for you and your generation. The regeneration.
So that's that one. The bit, I'd pick up one thing John said. A lot of these technologies, I describe them as subversive technologies because they can happen anyway without needing official government backing. Just like the Kenya ceramic Jiko changed the way people burn wood for cooking on in Kenya, which I worked on. And in fact, none of the big companies could undercut the artisans who made them at that. So that is an interesting thing. And I've got some more to say, but I'll say that later about it as a quality of a film, because there's a difference between the sorts of things that we could easily do as small documentaries. I'll just show you a still of one. This is a 15-minute film of interviews that I did for the Green Economics expedition. And it's rather different to the sophisticated animation, special effects and cutting that we saw in this really professionally made film.
Excellent, lovely. I like your analysis, David. That's very whizzy.
I once did the Film Oxford course on video making, and I discovered how hard it is compared to people like Zoe Broughton who do it for a living.
Yeah.
We've got 6 professional filmmakers in the Oxfordshire Green Party.
Well, if we could give them our idea then of you know, this local grid idea, or these this kind of positive example thing, then maybe we can convince them to do it. Michelle, hello. I can see your face. It's really great to see you. Did you want to say anything? Have they got any responses?
Yes, so somebody said the premise, big companies don't make money out of the solution, so they might fight efficiently against that. For a lot of people, to have solution for the climate change is to give up our comfortable life. But actually, it might be to take back control of our life and live a life that is meaningful, instead of falling for the adverts and all these stupid things that we do not need, but we spend all our money on it. There is a bit of that in a movie when we see a happy family planting trees and having a garden and so on, which is with more sense of community.
So, what's your 2040?
So that's probably something very fundamental. The adverts are just invading our life all over the place. And surely big companies have got very targeted and sophisticated way to get us to behave in such a way. So that's, yeah, that's what I wanted to say.
Yeah,
Yes.
I agree with that. Thank you, Julia.
Yes, sorry, I'll put my hand up. Yes, and I think that links in with the sort of scary thing we're up against, which is the big business and the fossil fuel companies and the power. He was comparing it to the tobacco industry, that just going beyond that and leaving that behind is going to be one of the biggest battles, because there's a lot to lose for all those, you know, for those industries, just like the tobacco industry, going local and going small and stopping the fossil fuels.
Yeah, I agree. And this sense of it's always through the prism of capitalism. And I think this film very much, as Michelle and Julie, you say, there's a lot to be lost, but he doesn't fully explore that in the film, because it is a nuclear family with new stuff and kits. And yes, it's a bit sci-fi in the use of the modern kitchen, but it's still a nuclear family and it's still existing in a capitalist society. And it's not this kind of subversive, anarchic, cooperative, caring society that might exist in a very different way. So he sort of framed it within a modern techie world that may not be possible. I'm not sure that actually a truly green, caring, sort of communal kind of way of living is actually anti-capitalist. And you know, I wonder if, you know, he kind of tries to have his cake and eat it. He has, you know, he's making it very, very compelling and attractive, but is that the reality? I just don't know, but you know.
We've just been talking about capitalism and businesses who don't want change. So I had just been listening to 2 podcasts this week. One, Peter Gorgihan, who works with Alan Ramsey on open democracy, had just brought out a book on paid for politics and how money influences politics. And we could ask him to come to a future book club. The other one, bit left field there's actually Freakonomics Radio. Stephen Dubner, who wrote the book Freakonomics, where he applied economic analysis to sort of everyday life. There was one on how the supermarket helped America win the Cold War. And it actually depends on industrialized agriculture, which is invented by the US government to prove that they could feed people better than the Soviet Union. And with all the distortions that were produced to make standardized goods that could be transported for long chains and sold in supermarkets. And you contrast that to the bits about food in this film, making it locally or even making it in vertical farms in city farms, as he showed there.
And imagine having fresh local food growing on our rooftops. This would also contribute to a much healthier environment.
It's unbeatable to grow food in your own backyard. It's unbeatable to grow food all through and around your city. It's unbeatable to grow food on your roof. Those are the absolute gold standard of emissions.
A very different future. And to a certain extent, if people start doing things locally, it may not matter what the supermarkets do if people are bypassing them.
Is there anyone else who'd like to talk about the food issue that you talked about and the agriculture? Mary?
Yeah, well, I mean, stressing how much carbon sequestration you can get through healthy soils is just amazing. I mean, it's more than the rainforests, basically. And we were hearing in the news today about peat bogs. If we just restored all the peat bogs in this country, we would make a huge difference to our carbon emissions. And it's probably better than planting lots of trees, because trees take a long time to grow and they don't necessarily thrive and they might be in the wrong places. Whereas peat bogs, if we just fill them up with water, the ones that have got left, they will be restored fairly quickly, and it would make a huge difference. I mean, soil is such an underrated resource. It's teeming with life. There's so much in there. And we've just been ignoring it through most of our discussions a lot of the time. Yeah, so just a shout out for the Real Farming Trust and the Oxford Real Farming Conference, basically.
Yes, and I think it's very easy to forget that actually without decent soil, as he's pointed out, there's no food. I mean, it's food.
Right.
And it's, you know, you just put the cattle back as they should be living. That was a bit I liked when he got, you know, because the animal welfare thing as well, when he got rid of all the cattle in pens and got them back out onto the pastures again, and how if they're roaming around as they should be doing, then you've got your good soil and the grassland, and you've got healthy cattle.
If we go back even a few thousand years, all the grasslands in the world were dominated by large mobs of grazing animals. And also they were kept moving all the time by predators. So the animals, in this case cattle, are never kept on the same area at one time.
By letting the cattle run amok in the crops, good things happen. They flatten the field, they create a utopia for the local insects, which becomes a natural fertiliser, and crucially, they are fed as nature intended.
And you've got a farmer who's actually making money, reckoned he'd saved £2 million from reverting to organic methods, from not putting all the fertiliser on. And I felt, you know, that was quite that was laid on with a trowel very thickly, and that was less subversive in that it was economically more viable to be organic. But that's good, you know, he's making his point that this farmer had really come full circle and really, you know, he'd gone down the industrial farming way and he'd realised what a waste of money and energy it all is.
And the fact it only took 3 months to regenerate the soil.
But that does depend on having local outlets for selling the produce. I mean, you can't sell meat produced like that through supermarkets. It's always going to be more expensive because it takes a lot longer. And so it's all linked in with eating less meat, but far better quality if we're going to from healthy animals. Yeah.
Mm. And I thought he was very balanced about that. Actually, he wasn't very pro-veganism, but he was very balanced. He was just sort of saying, well, in the future we will eat much more plant-based diets. Those who want to eat meat can eat good quality local meat. He didn't talk so much about dairy, but you could have the similar argument about dairy. And it was a fairly balanced way. He just said, the majority of food will be local and it will be plant-based.
Which I think is good, because I think if he'd gone down there, we all must be vegan pathway, then you lose a lot of your audience. Exactly. I think he's probably deliberately he's probably not vegan. Well, I don't know, but I mean, I think that was the right path to go down.
I think one thing that comes out of the film, and not just the film, but from other directions, is if we want to unpick this present world we live in and to begin to shift it to a more sustainable basis, it's the energy companies, the oil, gas, it's the big companies and their links with government and their links with power that has to be undone. And I'm wondering, like now when I was listening to that, I was wondering, somewhere I saw that the present government is spending a lot of money searching for oil off Mozambique, and yet they've called a climate emergency. So how does a climate emergency square with the idea of spending millions of taxpayers' money on searching for oil? And what can we do about that? That's where I hope, by being part of Greens, part of what have you, we need, who's making a noise about that?
How do you square this? How do you convince the UK government that that particular policy is wrong? So I just wanted really to go back to John Fox and to sort of get him to try and to put the last bit in. What how does he perceive that we make this statement, and to whom?
Okay, we'll have John and then David. John.
Okay, mine really was a question, because I'm relatively new to the idea of convincing government to do anything. But it seems like a glaring problem that if you have a government that's declared a global emergency on climate change, and then they are still investing in researching oil when we really need to leave the oil and the gas and the coal in the ground. And I'm not hearing anything from the Greens or from any other party that's sort of picking up on that and challenging it. I know that in 2015, the World Economic Forum did a study on how much governments were spending on researching sources of gas, oil, and what have you, and how much they were spending on renewables. And the money on research for oil was in the hundreds of billions, and the money in research for renewables was in, quite small.
Okay.
And the idea was that then the governments, I think the way that works, the governments were meant to take that away and do something with it. But since 2015, nothing has happened. But all the activists, the people who march in the streets and pick up on all sorts of things, I don't read anything, I don't hear anything that anybody is challenging that and saying, hey, you know, that money should be going to renewables. And I'm wondering why.
Thanks, John. We'll have David and then Sonia. David.
Right, I have a Mozambique-specific answer and a general answer. Trabalho por 2 anos na República Popular de Moçambique, 5 anos depois de independência. Let's start with the general one. I was at the UN Climate Conference in Germany. This would have been 2 years ago. And with the Green Economics Institute, who at every conference got people to come here and go with them to man the stall and run local meetings. And one of the specialists, a Russian one, actually contrasted 2 futures for Mongolia. One was increasing sale of coal to China. The other, to use their amazing landmass to collect wind and solar energy and put it on a direct current cable through China all the way to Japan. And that is actually a choice that faces many countries right now. There are people willing to spend money there, and there are alternative ways of using that investment. And if there's an official push and money behind the renewable alternative, they'll go with that. And one of the things that we're trying to discuss in that conference was financing systems for that. But if there aren't official projects like that or venture capitalists money that, then they'll fall back on what can make money in the short term, which are things like gas fields in Mozambique and the gem mines. Now, the thing that's stopping them happening is, one, the revelation of a corruption camp where $2 billion was siphoned to members of Frelimo because they were pushed into it by a Swiss and a Russian bank, which they finally renounced and it'll be courts are one. But also, there's actually a war in Cabo Delgado where all the dispossessed peasants who are not getting anything from these mines or gas things have decided to throw their lot in with the Islamist insurgents. And there's actually a low-level war going on in Cabo Delgado now between them. And Tony Blair and others are saying we should send troops there.
Okay. Well, can we just keep it fairly to the point? Thank you, David. I mean, it's really, really good information.
But the answer to the question of how you change things is, one, there are the top-level intergovernmental conferences where particular ideas get promoted and thought of as better than the existing world. Just as this film is showing there's a possible better future than carrying on as what we thought about normal. So that's one end of it. The other end of it is very local things, which can be local grids, and it can actually be warfare.
Okay, Sonia, what was your point?
2 things in answer to John Fox. He said he hasn't seen anybody, activists out in the streets campaigning against fossil fuels. Well, I can tell you that there are many XR groups around the country who have been doing a huge amount protesting in front of the big banks, telling them to stop investing in fossil fuels and to invest them in alternatives. XR have done an awful lot in this area. And the other thing is getting people to invest in the alternatives. And I happen to know from personal experience, we changed our pension just before COVID over to a green pension scheme. And during COVID, we were asked not to take any pension for a while because, you know, the investments had all gone down and the investment system had all sort of ground to halt, which we did. But I have to tell you that within a very short time, our green pension pot is returned almost to what it was before COVID, and ordinary investments in fossil fuels and things have actually dropped dramatically, and that's all over the economic press. You can read that. The Shell has lost 50 billion, I think they announced this morning, and coal, the price of coal shares has absolutely sunk. People are beginning to invest in alternatives and taking their investments away. And I can tell you that the fossil fuel industry is very concerned about this. So really our government are behind the curve in trying to dig out, invest in more fossil fuels, as we don't need it. I mean, we all know there was a glut of oil a few months ago. It dropped to sort of pence per litre because there was too much of it and there was nowhere to store anymore. So who knows why our government behind the curve.
No, I think, go on, carry on.
No, that's all I need to say. So, people are investing and people are actually out there being very active as well.
Yeah. I think you're right. I think there's two prongs. It's like a pincer movement. And I think certainly, we work with allies, XR are our allies, and they protest against. But I think we need to offer something that's for. So we need to invest in alternative technologies. We also need to divest. So just as you say, Sonia, we need to bring our money out of all those unsustainable companies. And I think we live in capitalism and that money talks. We have to make sure that we are showing that there's an economic argument all the time for green technologies and sustainable economies. And I think we are making that. And Sonia, that's a really good example. And I think, BP are showing that they've made massive losses in the last few months. So we've got to put that pressure on, but I think it's got to be from a financial point of view. And I think, Mary.
Well, just to add that a lot of green councillors have been trying to persuade their councils to divest from fossil fuels.
Yes.
I mean, there are motions all over the country brought by Greens to do that.
Yeah, and I work for Oxfordshire County Council, and I put my letter of protest about the investment in the Brunel package. We put our pension fund into that. And they did start to make a change. They still argue that engagement with fossil fuel companies, engagement is better than divestment, full stop. I would beg to differ. I think we should just divest. But they said that they are starting to move their money and starting to actually give them a kick and say, well, if you don't act, then we will divest in the future. So there's this kind of threat hanging over it. So at least Oxfordshire County Council have started to make that threat with the pension fund. And there is growing awareness of it. I think this is what we're realising. We've come up with this idea that we talked about what's going on in Oxfordshire and local grids. You remember that bit in the film, the Bangladesh grid networks and energy networks? It'll probably be fresh in your minds.
Yes.
We had just quickly wondered about joining up all the little networks that are on in Oxfordshire, and almost, he visually joins up all those little networks of the solar panels. And I wonder if we could replicate something like that in Oxfordshire of what's going on in all the little hubs. Is there anything going on in Tame?
Not currently, but it's in our Green Living Plan, which the Tame Council has just ratified. It's been 5 years in the making, and some sort of local energy hub is definitely in there. The first thing we're starting with, it's only been ratified 2 weeks, is a solar streets, which you may have heard of, project. They've got it in Henley. They started off in Henley just before COVID, and it sort of slowed down. Basically, if you could get 10 households within not necessarily a street, but quite close together, they will fit solar panels on your roof at a reduction, because they make savings, because the surveys can all be done in one day because they're in one town. They can move around the installation in a small area. And I think it's about £4,000 per household. And for everybody who takes up the scheme, you get £50 to put into a community fund to use in some other way for some sort of community project. So we're investigating that. They've done it in loads of places, including Frome. And I say Henley had 50 people signed up. I think that initially it's down to sort of 38 now, but it's really taking off there. They're just about to start the first installation. So that's our first thing. So energy is a really big thing in our Green Living Plan.
Brilliant. Okay, we've got about 8 minutes left of the discussion. For those of you who haven't watched the film, definitely watch it. It is a real treat. And I'll just, will let other people do their final responses. But I had a really interesting experience watching it because I have 2 children who are 9 and they don't usually watch family films. They're not really film watchers. They don't particularly like the usual kind of family friendly films. And I said, well, I've got to watch this for Oxfordshire Green Party Club. And it's suitable for children. I said, I think it would be really interesting for you to watch. And they sat there yesterday evening and they were gripped from beginning to end. And we all watched it in silence. And they do like documentaries. I mean, they are quite facty kind of kids. So all my sort of reservations about the idealistic nature of it. And do you remember the bit at the beginning with all those cute children from around the world kind of doing a vox pop? And I thought, oh, this is a little bit cheesy, especially with the English, very, very posh English children all speaking about their hopes for the future. So they're
going all around the world and talking to lots of different children your age, and so we're going to ask you what kind of things you want to see in the future.
Well, what would make me happy in the world is... I think we should get this invention which sucks up all of the rubbish in the world and puts it in an intergalactic dimension, which is a rubbish dimension.
I'd like to see deforestation being stopped because it's ruining the planet. Animals are losing their homes.
I framtiden skulle jag nog vilja att man typ skulle kunna plantera ett frö och sen växer det upp en köttbit som man slipper döda djur. Cleaner water? That would really make me happy. Nikiwa mkubwa, ningependa kuona mazingira masafi kwa sababu nisipate magonjwa.
Well, I would like for the government to have done something on global warming and pollution. As now, I think they're not really doing anything about it.
You know, just be respectful to Earth.
There's just something in me. But my children were immediately engaged. They were immediately engaged with it. They followed the story. They liked, as David says, the narrative of the 2019 calendar and then the 2040. That made it easy for them to realise. They liked the kind of cheesy happy ending. And it made me think that maybe this would be absolutely ideal for sort of year 6s, year 7s, and they should just show it as a curriculum piece because it's actually taking the pressure off. It's reducing like mental health problems in young children because it's saying, hey, this is the future and it's looking good. You know, it's not bleak. And, you know, and we're not all going to just see the earth crumble. And it was really quite good on the science, you know, using the family home sort of analogy and being quite clear and using the funny little, the animation with the little people talking on the wind farm, but it kept them interested. So from my experience of watching it as a family, I kind of think it really, really hung together as a film. And I would just put it on the curriculum immediately, even though, you know, we could pick holes in it. Are there
I
any
want the rocket boots powered by plants. I love that.
Yeah, there was a lot of humour in it, wasn't there? Yeah. Okay, Mary.
Yeah, I just thought, I mean, one point, the point that he made at the end was very telling, that it's the education of women that is making such a huge difference all over the world to the way societies are coping with these things. And you know, links in with your school thing.
control. It's just empowering girls to be who they want to be, and you have these incredible benefits.
One child, one teacher, one book, and one pen can change the world.
Yeah. And I think the children were quite intrigued by that because they hadn't really thought about girls not having an education and women having 5 or 6 children. And it was, but it put it in a kind of a positive way again, wasn't it? It was all about the emancipation of girls, you know, and that things were improving. So that was great for them. Julia.
Yes, I absolutely agree with the sort of getting children to watch it. I immediately actually sent a link to my goddaughter, who's 14, thinking it will give her ideas because she's interested in that sort of thing. Just to, yeah, I mean, I think all teenagers and younger children like you should watch it, definitely, because they are the next people coming up behind us, really. So yes, and the whole thing about the women, the more education they have, the fewer children, you know, the better for the planet. The overpopulation, that was a really good point.
Yeah, Tina.
I was just going to say I'm a bit disappointed that the conversation hasn't at all gone on in the direction of structural inequalities and racism and things like that, which I think is at the root of our climate catastrophe and shouldn't be ignored.
Yeah, I agree. And there's, I think the naivety of the film is there, and I think at the end he just says something about, oh well, if we choose the right leaders then it'll all be okay and it could be like this. And I thought, well, that's a big if. We need to address structural inequalities, we need to address racism, nationalism, sexism, as well as just put these, you know, alternative technologies. I agree. Do you want to extend your point, Tina?
Well, I think it's just something that we've got to start thinking about a lot more, and instead of just talking about all the little bits and pieces, put it together into a coherent whole where we understand that things have gone so badly wrong for so long, and that our white privilege has been, it's just horrifying, really, what we've done, and how unaware most people seem to be of what we've done.
John,
just following on, and what were you were talking earlier about the different isms. I thought it was very clever that he put into the film a discussion with Kate Raworth and her donut economics, because in making that structural change, I think that's a very important part of the picture, and that was an example of something that exists and something that's there, a tool to be used.
Though it sounds, I think it looks like a donut. The kind with a hole in the middle. So in the hole in the middle of that donut is a place where people are falling short on life's essentials, be it food, housing, education, water, energy. And so we want to get everybody in the world out of that hole. But we also can't go beyond the donut's outer crust, because there we start to put so much pressure on this extraordinary planet, causing climate breakdown, biodiversity loss, air pollution, too much land conversion. We kick out of kilter this extraordinary living planet on which all of our well-being depends.
Some of us are certainly pushing for Oxford City Council to get behind Kate and not be behind Amsterdam in our ability to think differently and restructure ourselves.
I hope you succeed.
It seems ridiculous that we've got Kate living here and yet we're not taking her ideas on board.
Yeah. Thanks, Tina. David?
Yes. You can't complain about the film missing what's so bad about the world when the whole point of it is to give you optimism that things might be different. And,
I wasn't complaining about the film, I was complaining about this discussion.
Oh, right, okay, yeah, fair enough. Okay, yes, I was, because, but there's actually a problem in campaigning. If you're always talking about the negatives and how bad things are and protesting, you don't get people to follow you who are actually looking for some happy thing in the future, their vision of maybe a sustainable Oxfordshire, to bring it locally. And it's actually getting that over, just like, to take a really crude example, Nigel Farage managed to sell a vision of a wonderful independent England after Brexit without going into any of the details, just by giving a emotional picture of the future. And what we haven't done enough, I think, is actually got the feeling. Now, just pick back to the bit about, there's one other point I had to make, it to do with the educational value. And I wanted to just show 1 minute of what made me think this was a really good film and a really good educational film.
And have been dramatically increasing the release of the Earth's stored carbon into our atmosphere. For hundreds of thousands of years, we hovered between about 180 and 280 parts per million of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. But since the Industrial Revolution, that number has shot up over 40% to more than 400 parts per million, trapping heat in our atmosphere. More than 90% of the excess heat being trapped is absorbed by our oceans. The oceans also absorb much of the extra carbon dioxide, and so are now around 30% more acidic than they were 150 years ago. And this is impacting on biodiversity. As many sea creatures, such as oysters or clams, are struggling to make their shells. But the increased heat and overall energy in the system also leads to more intense weather events. Hotter air can hold more moisture, so rainfalls, storms, hurricanes, floods, even snowfalls can become heavier.
That, right early on the film, convinced me that this was a wonderful, educational and persuasive film.
Yeah. Thank you. It's a nice way to end it all.